How wonderful it is to be here. What a day. And I think it's a day when really too much sunshine can never quite be enough. I understand we're on Darkinjung land and I pay my respects to elders past and present. So it's been quite the year. How exciting is it to be here on stage in person? Candice?
It's good. I missed people. The good and the bad of dealing with the public. I missed all of it. Talking to readers and getting that feedback, and just the other day somebody said to me, I've loved all your books except the last one. I hated it so much. I gave it to a friend of mine and I said, you finish it and tell me what happens. Actually, don't bother because I don't care. I was like, I am back, baby.
Are you back, baby, too, Sulari?
I don't feel like I ever left. It's been an interesting thing because I'm in the country. Being isolated is just the way we are, and so lockdown passed us by in a way that wasn't really a change from our ordinary behaviour, which is sitting around in our pyjamas. Writing novels. So it's lovely to be out on the coast, to be in the thriving metropolis of Umina, and to see people and to catch up with people and to tentatively stand around wondering whether one should hug or shake hands or tap elbows, because we're in that space of not knowing at the moment. But it's delightful to see you all. I can't believe we've got such a healthy bunch of people turning out. Thank you for coming.
Anna, lockdown really was your introduction to the writing world to some extent. I mean, the place came out just before lockdown, is that right?
Right in the middle.
Right in the middle. And how was that for you?
Yeah, great. I mean, it was great. It was really, really brilliant and very exciting and wonderful. I think, when you're a debut novelist and your book's about to come out, you do feel like you've won the lottery, pandemic or no. And so, it didn't take away from the fact that all these incredible things were happening. Oh, sorry.
Start again.
That would happen to me.
It was on. Now it's on.
Get me another.
Yours.
Thanks, darling. Hi. Now, that's actually a really cool thing to have happened because, I mean, as a debut novelist, I already feel like an interloper, as it is, on this panel, and very grateful and excited to be here. But, I feel like I balanced the panel out nicely. Sulari and Candice have written, 10,000 novels between them, and I've written one. So, very new to all of this, which is what makes this incredibly exciting. And, to be doing this on home turf as well is extraordinary. But yes, having a book come out in the middle of a pandemic, on the one hand, it didn't take away from all those amazing things that were happening, but it also at points did feel like all my hopes and dreams were being dashed. Do you know what I mean? And I don't know, I guess when you're about to be published and you're up and coming, usually you're somebody that has attended a lot of festivals as an aspiring writer or as a reader. And so, you sat there going, one day it'll be me. And then your book comes out and a pandemic hits and you're just in your house for a year, which was fine, and the digital events were extraordinary and amazing. And I just take my hat off to the entire publishing industry because the creative ways that they problem solved under duress was amazing. And so I did get to do lots of events, but I'm so excited to be in the same room as people. I don't think you can kind of replace that. Do you know what I mean?
She is very excited.
She always seems to be very excited. We spent the evening together, we've spent lunch together, and I think, would you say, often
I'm coming home with you.
No. And she's coming home. Has anyone read The Safe Place? That might strike a bit of fear in your heart. So if Anna says she's coming home, say, perhaps not now. Now, back to you, Candice. Over the past few years, there's been a growing interest in crime fiction set in Australia. Now, commentators have said that this is a new thing, but Candice, it's not really, is it? Because your early books in particular have been set in Australia.
Yeah, I started off writing about Australia because this is, this is where I'm from. My earlier novels as well, I wrote 4 novels and they were rejected by everyone on the planet, and I accumulated over 200 rejection letters across those 4 novels, and they were always set in places that I thought were exciting. Well, this is where the intrigue lives, is in New York and Paris. I've never been to either of them, so the writing was suffering something, I think. So I wanted to write where I was from. And people have really enjoyed me writing about the western suburbs of Sydney. It's funny, I got nominated for an award. I got this piece of paper in the mail and it said, "You've been nominated for Champion of the West." And I said, "What the hell is that?" And it said, "It's people who champion the western suburbs." And I was like, have you read any of these books? I have depicted the western suburbs of Sydney as a hotbed of crime, prostitution, drugs, corruption, and I didn't win. I never heard anything ever again. And I think somebody went, hang on, should we read one of those? Yeah. So yeah, now I'm straying away again. I've written 12 novels set in Australia, and so my last couple have been in Los Angeles and Vegas and those sorts of places where I have spent time.
And with The Chase, which is your newest book, we're in Arizona.
Yeah.
And why America? Why Arizona? Tell me a bit about this.
My husband and I decided to spend some time overseas before we settled down, have a baby, get a house, that kind of stuff. And we said, let's spend a year in LA. And people were saying to us, why? And I was like, because it's full of crime. It's got nice weather and it's full of crime. What more could you want? And I was just so inspired by that. I said to my husband, I have 3 goals for being in the US. I want to call 911. I want to be part of a crowd and something happens and I shout, somebody call 911, in a separate incident. And I want to be pulled over by a highway sheriff, like with the aviator glasses, and he comes up to the window and I roll it down and I say, what seems to be the problem, officer? Then I had all 3 of those things done in the first 6 months. So it was really great. And I arrived in LA, I was there about 15 minutes and I thought, I have to write about this place. And of course, Arizona and Vegas and that they're all Nevada, they're all right behind LA. So we spent a lot of time out there.
The Chase, a prison breakout, but not just any prison breakout. Why have 690 prisoners broken out in the beginning of your book, Candice?
I was thinking to myself, what am I going to do? I grew up watching, crime stories. My dad was a parole officer at a Sydney prison. My mum fostered 155 kids as I was growing up. So there were a lot of crime stories coming through the house, and that's what interested us. So when all the kids would sit down, to watch a movie, we'd watch The Fugitive or The Great Escape or something like that. And The Fugitive with Harrison Ford and Tommy Lee Jones is a film that is very dear to my heart because I've been watching it since before I could figure out what it was about. It's so dear to my heart that I had a fugitive moment in the middle of my birth of my daughter. There's this line in the film where Harrison Ford has been accused of killing his wife and he's saying to the detectives, a one-armed man came into my house and killed my wife and it's your job to find that man. You find that man. And it's a cheesy sort of, they do an echo. They go, you find that man, find that man, find that. And it comes through the film a couple of times. Anyway, flash forward to my birth of my daughter. I'm there and they said to me, you can't have an epidural. And I was like, what? I really want one. And they said, no, you can't have one because the guy's giving someone else an epidural somewhere else in the hospital and we can't really locate him right now. And I turned to my husband and I said, you find that man. And he got it, but everyone else in the room was like...
Did you get your epidural?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't. Dang it.
Sulari, you're best known for your Roland Sinclair series of books, at least so far. Who is Roland Sinclair? Just give us a bit of an introduction to this
The character. So he actually doesn't exist, to those of you who might think that he does. And there are a few people who are convinced that they are Roland Sinclair. A few gentlemen who I have met over the years. He's the protagonist of my crime series. He is a gentleman artist. He is from a very wealthy pastoral family. It's all the novels are set in the 1930s. So it was, one of those families that they used to have where they could not spend their wealth in one generation. So that kind of wealth. But Roland is an artist, and so he naturally gravitates to the left-wing bohemian communists of Sydney because they were rife in the artistic community. And I think he was developed that way because I needed a protagonist who could walk in all levels of society if I was going to write him as an amateur detective. So that's basically who he is. I've lived with him for 10 books now. We're pretty good friends. and I intend to keep living with him for as long as readers will allow me to do so.
And strangely enough, although Roland is living in the 30s, he could travel, whereas we can't. And in his in the latest book, A Testament of Character, which is your 10th book of the Roland Sinclair series, we find ourselves in America. Why America?
Because, look, part of it was that's where the story took me, but part of it was also that Roland is now published in America, and he has American fans. And I was really surprised at how much the American readers adopted Roland. I always had this funny idea that, a story set so firmly in Australia in the 1930s that was sort of so involved in our history would not be of interest to Americans. So I was quite surprised when he was picked up by an American publisher, and even more surprised by his burgeoning popularity in America, and quite touched as well. So the way I tell readerships is by communications from readers. So now I get as many letters from people in the States as I do from people in Australia, which is lovely, and they seem to engage with him. So I think in some ways I wanted to take Roland to them. And so I wrote that book in Boston without ever having been there. I don't let that stop me.
That's brave. That's brave.
I just carry on. So that worked out quite well. But to be honest, I write in the 1930s, so the Boston of the 1930s is not there anymore. Yeah. So it's a little bit easier to pull off writing in a place you've never been when you're also writing in a time that no one's... there's a few people who have been there, but they're a diminishing readership, the people who actually remember the 1930s.
I think that's an interesting point, Sulari, that when you're writing historical work, do you need to visit that place when that place no longer exists?
Yep.
My recent novel, The Deceptions, is set during the war, in the Second World War. And the question is, do you need to go to the camps to understand what the camps are like when you can never go there during the 40s? So, Sulari, would going to Boston have helped, in retrospect, the book?
No, I don't think so. I would have had a good time. and funnily enough, I did travel through the States at the end of 2019, but by that time I'd already completed the book, and I didn't go to Boston. I think one of the... I know I've often been called a writer of place, and people think that they get from my books a real sense of place. And I find that interesting because I don't spend a lot of time describing the physical features of a landscape. What I try to give readers is a sense of people, and people bring place with them. If you write an American authentically, they will bring their country with them. If you write an Australian authentically, they'll bring their country with them. And so I've actually spent more time trying to put my finger on what makes an American American, and what makes someone from Boston, and what makes someone from Boston in the 1930s, someone from Boston in the 1930s. And then I let them bring their landscape with them into the novel.
Anna, I suspect that's not quite the case for you with The Safe Place. The Safe Place is imbued with landscape and place right from the very beginning. Do the characters bring place, or does the place highlight the character?
Oh, both. Both. I think it depends what you're writing. I mean, I think what Sulari is talking about is... at acting school, we had a dialect class, and one of the first things that my dialect teacher always said to us was, when you're doing an accent, when you're learning how certain people talk, you're not just thinking about the physiology of the mouth and what, you know, the language that they use, the idiom. When you've got someone from the deep south, you've got to know that the reason that they talk like that is often because it's really hot. And they've got that. So it's all about what's going on in their environment that affects who they are and why they behave in a certain way. So I think that's what you're talking about in terms of people bringing place with them. When you're writing setting, in a story, that's something different, and that brings its own dimension to it. But you know, the Safe Place is a story about a place, so you can't get away from describing that in good detail. Is my microphone doing something weird? It is, isn't it? Honest to God.
Well, then we can't cut each other off.
No, that's
Just
true.
keep going, or we'll have to take on as we need it. Let's just keep on going. So I think maybe it's just a location area as to whether it's up or down.
Yeah. So because it's a story about an actual place. That's where that becomes really important, and atmosphere is really important to me as a storyteller. And I think that is how. That's where The Safe Place gets its eeriness from, is the description of a very extraordinary kind of place and the people that come into that place and are affected by that place. So I'm not talking about how the place, the characters bringing the place. I'm talking about the characters going into a particular space and how they are affected by that in that instance, if that makes sense.
And the place we're talking about is the south of France.
Yeah.
How did this come to you? Why the south of France? Why not Yamina?
Because I worked as a housekeeper, live-in housekeeper / caretaker in a very beautiful, sprawling property on the west coast of France when I was, sort of in my late 20s doing some backpacking. And it was the most extraordinary experience. And when I was there, I'm very happy to say that nothing weird or sinister happened to me directly while I was there. They were lovely people. But it was an intensely eye-opening experience. If you've ever been employed by somebody with whom you also live, that's quite an extraordinary situation. And the place itself was like nothing on earth I'd ever been to. I mean, they were wealthy beyond anything I'd ever experienced before.
Did you send them a copy of the book?
I did. Well, I was really worried because I thought like they might sue me or something. I mean, they're not in it, but it's definitely derived from my experience with them. And they're really quite powerful people in the States. And I was like, oh my God. So I had to send them an email going, hello, long time no see, hope you're well, this is what's going on with us, la la la. By the way, I've done something a little bit extraordinary, and I've written a book about your house. Okay, best wishes, bye. So, but they were fine. They were kind of a bit nonplussed, actually, so that was fine.
and for those who haven't read The Safe Place, of course, the book is about the young protagonist, Emily Proudman, who finds herself in this enormous estate with a couple and their daughter, and things get murky. So you can imagine such a letter may have been a mixed blessing.
Yeah.
But you're still in touch?
Still in touch, still friends, yeah. Yeah, it's all fine. I mean, it is a little bit odd. I mean, it's obviously not based on them, but it is a kind of, British-born ex-actress living with this family at their house that bears a strangely uncanny similarity to theirs. So you can see where it gets awkward. Yeah.
Sulari and Candice, any similar awkward situations you've found where people have either recognised themselves, failed to recognise themselves, or had an odd reaction?
I walk real people into the Roland Sinclair series. I probably shouldn't talk about this, but I'm going to anyway. In A Murder Unmentioned, Bob Menzies was in it. He wasn't the killer, but he was in it. And quite often because it's the 1930s, I don't often have contact with the people who walk into my books, because quite often they're adults by the time they walk into my books, so they're unlikely to still be alive. But I do occasionally run into their children and their descendants. So I've run into the descendants of two prime ministers. So one was Earl Christmas Grafton Page's granddaughter, who I ran into at a festival, and she was just chatting to me afterwards, and she said, you would have loved to meet my grandfather. He was very involved in politics. In fact, he was deputy premier for a short while, deputy prime minister for a short while. And I said, your grandfather wouldn't have happened to be Earl Christmas Grafton Page, would he? And she said, yes, how did you know? And I said, he's actually in the third book. And she said, I'm going to go buy 20 copies for all the family. And I said, I think you should read the third book. And the second one was Bob Menzies' daughter, Heather, I've forgotten her last name.
Henderson.
Heather Henderson. She was not impressed. She was quite angry, and she wrote a letter to my publisher, basically saying I was a leftist plant who was, denigrating her father. And it was a really, quite a passionate letter. But the thing that I found really interesting is the thing that she objected to most was not really the depiction of her father in the book, but the fact that I said that their house, the house that he lived in Toorak in Melbourne, when he was deputy premier and a barrister, was luxurious. Because I'd used that word because she thought that was... She thought that he lived in a very humble abode in Toorak in Melbourne. And that I was just inflaming the situation by making him sound elitist. So that happens. That happens, and you've just got to learn to live with it, I guess.
I have a great one about this, because everyone knows I work with James Patterson, and James Patterson is the world's best-selling author. He outsells Stephen King and J.K. Rowling every year combined. He is a multi-billionaire. He lives in a $14 million French chateau-style house that he bought on the beach in Florida and put $17 million worth of renovations into. So, working with somebody like that is incredibly intimidating. But by about book 6, I was starting to get a little cheeky working with him. And, he was we put together this book called The Inn, and a lot of those characters were his. It came from the outline. And I said to him, we were talking... Oh, the mic's again.
Mic's fine, just ignore the mic. The mic will be good.
We were talking on the phone, and I said, there's this character, this old dude, and I don't get him. I don't know why he's in there. He's just hanging around in the inn. He has no function. And Jim said, just leave him in there. He's fine. Just let him do his thing. He's there. He has some dogs, whatever. And so I should have put two and two together, because I had the manuscript, and I just got sick of that character, and so I had him really viciously stabbed to death. and he's on the floor bleeding out. I really enjoyed killing him, and I wrote it, and blood everywhere, end scene. And I sent it back, and Jim goes, well, now I'm in a pickle, because that's a friend of mine who I said I'm putting in the book. And it's a really good death, but I know this person. I play golf with them. I have to see them like every week. And I said, well, you have some explaining to do. Because we're leaving it as is. Yeah.
Did he get reincarnated? Did he get
No,
resuscitated?
no, he left it.
He's dead.
He's dead, yeah.
How's the golf going?
It's fine, apparently. He just wore it, yeah. But, you never know how someone's going to react to being in a novel, because I run competitions every now and then. You can be in the next Candice Fox novel, just donate to this cause or whatever. And the first time I ever did that, I was raising money for Cure Cancer Australia or something, and this woman said, I want to know the details of this competition. If I win, can I put someone else in it? I said, yeah, sure, no problem. She said, can I put my 8-year-old son in it? And I said, yeah, sure, no problem. She goes, could you brutally murder him?
Sure, no problem.
And I was like, okay. Okay, no. Whatever you want. If you win, go ahead. Yeah.
We're going to move to good news with you, Anna. You have a new book out later this year. Tell us, what's the book called? Can you give us any clues at all?
Yeah, so I probably shouldn't say too much, but it's called The Shadow House. It's out with a Fern Press on September 28th, and it's about a single mum, Alex, who moves with her teenage son and baby daughter to an eco-village. And the eco-village is built on former farmland. And some strange things start happening to this single mother. And it turns out that the same strange things happened to the farmers who used to live on the land. And those things resulted in the disappearance of their teenage son. And so the book is about Alex sort of trying to figure out what happened in the past to save her family in the present.
And you've set this in Australia this time. Why Australia? Why not back to France?
All right, so it was always going to be partially set in Australia. What I wanted to do originally was create something that sort of spread across different countries. So I was gonna have one POV in Bristol, England, which is where a lot of my family are from, one POV set here in Australia, and then I was going to bring them together by taking them to, like, Guatemala or something. And it was going to be brilliant, and I was really excited, and I planned it all out, and it looked fantastic on the sticky notes. It was gorgeous. I was really excited. And then I wrote it, and it just fell apart. It was just horrible, and I was contracted to deliver it, and the deadline was creeping closer. I can see that I've got two really good friends, my writers group, who are in the audience. They're smiling at me because they saw this whole process. It was awful, and I hated it. And every time I went to the computer, I was like feeling sick because it was just the most awful, awful thing. I hated it. Had to hand it in to the publishers, and bless them, they were so supportive. But ultimately, they were kind of going, yeah, no, it's not. We're not going to publish this. And but what they did do is say they outlined the reasons why it didn't work, and they outlined a lot of reasons why it did work. A lot of things that they liked about it. So they're like, keep these things, but these are the things that don't work. And one of the things was they said, it's not, your action isn't rooted to a place, and that's really important for story, but it's also kind of emerging that is one of your strengths as a writer. So definitely try and find a place. And can you do that in 2 weeks, kind of thing? I was like, So then I was kind of casting around desperately, going, right, what's around me? What can I kind of see and lock onto that I can describe, like, now? And in the original draft, one of the characters talked about wanting to build an eco-village one day. So I was like, okay, maybe it's set in an eco-village. I'll try and find one. And so I Googled eco-villages, New South Wales. Turns out there was one 10 minutes down the road from me, down at Narara. I was like, get out of town. And this was a Thursday, and they were having an open day on the Saturday. So I was like, booked. And I turned up, and I drove through the gates of Narara Eco Village and just went, oh, this is perfect. So it's not set, I have to say, it's not set at Narara Eco Village, but they have been so beautiful down there in kind of answering my questions and letting me walk around and letting me spend a bit of time there. And yeah, like, so this setting, the whole book is now set in this eco village. And I have to say it's been, whilst I think the imagination can do anything, and you certainly don't have to go to the place that you're writing about, but I think for me, if you're under pressure of time and you do need to churn something out quite quickly, if you can see it and feel it and touch it, you've got kind of quicker access, I think. So that is why the whole thing is now set in Australia.
I think that when you go to a place, you learn those things that only the locals know. Like, I'm thinking of Boston, and in Boston, in the bars, they have this thing called a pickleback, where you drink a beer and then you have a shot of pickle juice. Yeah, I know, that's what I said.
Why would you do that?
Pickleback. What?
Why would you do that?
I don't know. They're just, I don't know. They drink, that's what they have. And you know, I only learned that from being in a bar in Boston. But I'm also thinking about prisons. The prisons I have visited, and people know that I spent some time visiting a serial killer in San Quentin. And the things that you learn about prisons by listening to prisoners whinging about what their conditions are like, you don't get that unless you go and you talk to them, and if you can go to a prison, if you want to write about one of them, it's just so helpful.
Yeah, though.
Now I'm thinking about how I said that. Legally, no, don't commit crimes, please. No.
Yeah, though, I mean, to be honest, there were things that I discovered about Boston that locals didn't know, because I was talking about Boston in the 1930s. And also, bear in mind, I'm not writing a local Bostonian, I'm writing an Australian man going to Boston. So I'm writing what he notices when he's there. So that's probably my out. Yeah. And I think if I was writing a story told from the perspective of a local, yes, I would need to go there.
No, I wasn't being like, you should do this, because I don't think that any writer should do that to another writer. Say, you should work like this, because I know so many writers and they all write differently, you know, and they all come out with this wonderful stuff in their own little process. Mark Brandy has to sit in a silent room with earphones on and play rain sounds and all that jazz, and everyone's
and Maggie Joel, anyone who knows Maggie Joel's work, she it's historical and quite sedate and quite pared back. She apparently writes to punk music and heavy metal.
She writes with the TV on, don't you?
Yeah, you write with the TV, don't you, Sulari?
I watch television when I write. But it's always something quite mellow. Not something that you need a lot of attention for, so it's always Midsummer Murders or The Widows. And that plays in the background, and I sit and write. There is a reason for it. It's that whole Kylie Ladd. I don't know if you've ever read any of her books. She's a cognitive psychologist. And I used to be very ashamed of this very weird process of mine, because it sounds like I don't care. I'm watching television and I'm writing a novel because I can't be bothered paying attention. But it's not that. And she was saying to me, it's the process, because you're engaging your prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the creative centre of the brain, and apparently it's very difficult to access it directly, and that's why when you forget a word, you are trying to think of that word, you can't find it, and then you go away and do something else, and suddenly it pops into your brain. So it's that process. So basically, I'm going away and watching television, and a novel pops into my brain, and it's just that process expanded.
I had this amazing experience. I know I'm dominating. You haven't been able to ask a question in the last 5 minutes. Sorry. Am I making your job easier or harder? But I was in a cafe once, because I like to write in cafes because there's noise and chaos and all that kind of stuff. And I was sitting there doing some writing, and I had my glasses on, my head down, and I'm always eavesdropping, like one ear is out and one's in the story. And the women at the table just here started talking about me. Because I had just given a talk the night before in that suburb, and so this woman was telling this woman about the talk, and I'm sitting there going, okay, so do I say, hello, you're talking about me, or not? Because what happens if in 10 minutes they realise that I'm sitting here and they're like, we were just talking about you the whole time and you must have heard it. So I didn't know what to do. And being a writer, I love praise and attention. So I thought, and so I just leaned over and I went, excuse me. And this woman, she shot out of her seat, standing, and she went, you, like that. She was so surprised. She went, you, like that, like an accuser in court. And everyone in the cafe looked, and I was like, oh, I really regret doing this now.
I also really loved it.
Yeah, I also really loved it. Yeah. So.
We're going to move on and talk about international editions. Each of you is published not only in Australia but also the UK, the US and also foreign territories. So my question to all of you is, do readers react to your work differently depending on the country? Sulari.
I get to go first. It's hard to tell. As I said before, I've been surprised that the Americans have taken Roland. I think the biggest difference is probably in Crossing the Lines, which was published as after she wrote him in America. Americans, there are some American readers that take it very personally if you don't give them a classic happy ending. So in America, there's some books that are actually published with a sort of a little tag that tells you that you're going to get a guaranteed happy ending. And so that was a surprise for me, because in Australia, that's not necessarily, it's not necessarily the bargain that you have with the reader when you write a book for them, that you will bring them happiness and light and stuff at the end. So Crossing the Lines has a quite an ambiguous ending, or an interesting ending that can be regarded as not happy if you choose to look at it that way. And so I did have a lot of readers in America who were really personally affronted by that. And forget about the fact that it fitted with the book. They were just personally affronted that I could do this to the characters. And in some ways, whilst that is a little bit confronting as a writer to get that feedback, it's also lovely to know that they care about the characters enough that they get angry when you don't give them rainbows and weddings at the end. They do like their weddings. I did have a discussion I had a long, protracted discussion with my editor in America about the Roland Sinclair series. So, of course, he's 10 books in, and you can't really write a crime fiction or with a male and female lead and have sexual tension there if you let them get together. So Roland has been pursuing the same woman for 10 books. And she has been rebuffing him for 10 books.
He needs to give up. Go on Tinder.
And my American editor sort of sat me down and said, look, we really want them to get married. and Americans really like marriage. And she said they can get divorced in the next book. And that's a real difference. Well, Australians are quite happy to live with unrequited love or even unmarried love, but Americans seem to want that wedding.
Anna, I'm going to ask you, give you an offer, then ask you to answer that question. Would you like a hat?
Oh, no, I'm all right. I kind of feel like I'm in the spotlight. I'm good. I'm enjoying it.
You're going to have such a nice
So
tan
there's a selection.
I'm good. I'm fine. I feel like I'm wearing a disguise, so I'm fine. Thanks.
Anna's English, they like the same.
And after the offer is the question, which is your UK, US audiences. What's the feedback been that may have been slightly different to Australia?
I think it's similar to what Sulari says. But with mine, I think it more feeds into marketing. So The Safe Place is, in a lot of ways, it does fit into the crime thriller genre. It is a story about the discovery of a secret. It is a mystery. It's definitely got a sinister edge. hopefully, it creeps you out a lot in certain moments. But it's also, it is a love story. It's a study of a family, a kind of, a family that chooses one another rather than, a kind of a birth family. And it's the story of a place. And so when it's marketed, particularly in the US, as a straight-up crime thriller, you've got an audience that have certain expectations, and they get pretty pissed if you don't fulfill those expectations. And I think certainly there's a lot of commercial thrillers. If you don't have a twist that they can't guess, oh my God, woe betide you. And the Safe Place does have a twist because the secret is revealed. The protagonist does discover the secret, and she doesn't know what that secret is for a long time, so it's very surprising to her. But also, Emily is the kind of character, she's quite naive, and deliberately the reader sees the red flags before she does. And so, some people write to me and they're like, oh, I didn't see it coming. It was so amazing. I was so surprised when the thing came out. And other people go, I saw it coming a mile away. And I'm like, well, that's fine. And isn't that okay that you saw it coming, but you saw it all play out? And you saw how the different characters react to it. I mean, that is character, is different people, how people react to external circumstances, how people deal with obstacles. That creates character. So, yeah, I've had different reactions, but certainly in the US from those crime thriller readers, that it's come in for a little bit of heat here and there. But then I didn't set out to write a crime thriller either. So, I don't know, I quite like it. I like those kind of discussions and stuff. Like, I think it's great that the book's provoked a lot of different reactions. Yeah.
I have had the loveliest interactions with foreign language translations of my books. There's a lady in Japan who writes to me every single book with just one question, and it's, like, who is Jimmy Barnes, or whatever it is. What is this? What is that? What does it mean when everything goes pear-shaped? From the Italian translations, there's an older Italian man who just writes to me in Italian, and I take it and put it into Google Translate, and I translate what I'm going to say back. So I think he thinks I can speak Italian. And it's so great. I flaunt it as well. Like Tim says, who's the letter from? I say, it's Italian, old mate. And I go, well, buongiorno. He's the answer to your question. Yeah, and I have Swedish parents too, because this Swedish couple wrote to me and they said, we're sorry to call you Candice, but in our household you are family. So when I wrote back, I was like, dear Swedish parents. And I said, I'm going to send you a book, and I signed it, my Swedish parents, Bjorn and Yvonne, from Klappmark in Sweden. And it's lovely, it's lovely. I've got about 12 language translations of my work, and it's fun. Because a lot of those publishers, the small publishers, some of them, the Hebrew one, they just sent the book, they just printed it and sent it in Hebrew with a cover and everything. And my agent and I were looking at it and we're going, gee, that's a bit of an odd cover, isn't it? You've got like ocean and sky. And we went, well, hang on. Because they read that way. And so, and fun little experiences like that over the years. So that's great. It's loads of fun.
We've got 10 minutes to go, so really it's over to the audience for some questions. What I'm going to do is, if you just pop your hand up, there's a roving mic, and the roving mic will come to you, and we'll be off. If there's a problem, then I'll repeat the question.
Yeah.
Okay, so question to Candice. With 4 novels and 200 rejections, did you feel that you could keep writing? Did you have to change anything drastically?
Yes, double header of a question there. So it was 4 novels and 200 rejections. Why on earth did you keep going? You know what? I was really angry, and anger is a motivating emotion for some people because, I grew up in a really weird family. Like, my mum had 4 kids, and then she adopted 2, and then she fostered 155, as I was saying. So I was that weirdo kid at school who's always rocking up with foster kids, and, we were riddled with hair lice, and my mum's constantly getting stuff off the clean-up because she was a bit of a rescuer of people and things and animals. And so I grew up as a real freak, and I was constantly being told, you can't sit with us, and you can't be in our club, and you can't have this. And within my own household, it was like, you can't have those toys because we're giving those toys to the kids. And I was just angry. So I wrote my first novel, and I sent it off, and I got this really nice letter in the mail, and it was beautifully printed, and it had my name and the name of the novel and everything, and it said, you can't be published because you're not good enough. And I was like, I will show you. And so, it was anger. Yeah. And the second part of the question was, did I have to change much? Yes, because my first 4 novels were all sort of supernatural stuff. Vampires, werewolves, that's where my heart was in terms of writing. I was a huge Anne Rice fan, and goth, like a massive goth, and very moody. And I don't know why I wasn't writing crime. I had never written crime, but like my dad was a prison officer, and my mum was massively into prison and crime, and I've been reading true crime since I was about 7. And I know because I went to school and all my friends were reading the Chronicles of Narnia, and I relayed to them a story I had read in a true crime book called Killer Kids, about kids murdering their parents, and they all got really upset, and the teacher had to speak to my mum about what I had been saying and all this. So I was getting right into that. My mum started writing to prison inmates because she wanted to be involved in my dad's work life, and she was writing to 20 prisoners at the peak before she was like, I can't tell my murderers from my rapists at the moment. I'm going to have to cut back. So it was just what I was meant to be writing the whole time. So yes, I needed to change what I was writing. Yeah.
Another question. A couple of questions up the back. Thank you. We might just wait for the roving mic, which will come. So I think.
Candice, could you tell us more about the process of writing with James Patterson, and is it a 50-50 thing, or do you do most of the work, or what?
Everyone's giggling because that's a kind of a cheeky, but that is actually not the cheekiest I've ever had. Different people aggressively come up to me sometimes and they say, you write the whole book and he stamps his name on the cover and it's a production line and he has nothing to do with it. And I say, that would be so much easier than how it actually is, because he's right over the top of everything that we write. It's difficult to explain because people sort of look at the book as an object and they go, well, he must write half and you write half. So do you go chapter by chapter or whatever? But you can't just cut it down the middle like that. It would be more like if I said to you, all right, you and I were going to organise a wedding. So you organise exactly half of that wedding. And you go, well, how do you do that? Like, if you pick the colour scheme, do I then pick the photographer and that kind of stuff? So it translates into, we come up with an idea across a few phone calls, so maybe 2 or 3 phone calls before we really get, like, the concept down. And then we write a mini outline, so that's 3,000-4,000 words. I'll write a bit, I send it to him, he'll do some dot points, that kind of thing. He likes these massive outlines that have every single chapter, so we'll be writing that. I'll leave a gap because I'll be like, I don't know whether, she's in on it or not, ? He comes back and... So there's a lot of back and forth. Sometimes I send the manuscript to him and it comes back and he hasn't written anything. But he's just said, yeah, this is good, or he's sent me an email, or he's just said, call me on Tuesday morning and we'll talk about it. I can't talk about how he is with all of his collaborators simply because I don't know any of them. I've met a couple of them, but not to speak about how involved he is with other collaborators. I think the relationship between Jim and I works really, really well because at any given moment, both of us are very quietly aware of exactly who is in charge, which is me. So there's not a lot of argy-bargy while that's happening.
There's another question at the back, and there'll be a mic coming to you as well.
Yeah, I read a James Patterson once, so I can understand why he needs collaborators. Jeffrey Archer needs them too.
Snap.
Or more jail time. No,
Snap.
this question's for Sulari. When's number 11 come out?
I'm writing number 11 at the moment, so what happened was, because of COVID, publishing schedules got pushed back, so normally that book would have come out in the beginning of this year, but there was the fires and then there was COVID, and everybody was caught up in COVID and I was caught up in the fires as well, so that slowed everything down a little bit with the publishing schedules, not so much the writing. So hopefully 2022, if not 2022, at the very beginning of 2023, hopefully, if the publishers cooperate. I
think we've got time for one, perhaps two questions. There'll be one, you want to ask something. I can see, yes, thank you. There's a mic coming towards you.
Thank you. I'm in my mid-40s and I've never been interested in any kind of crime, anything, spies. My interests have been totally, almost the opposite. But due to some personal experience, life experience, I've recently become more interested in crime and criminals, the psychology of criminals, and spies, covert operations and things, due to that sort of coming into my life in a really weird way. I'm just wondering, from your perspective, writing about it, spending so much energy and time getting into these people's psyches, is there, or do you think there's some role this plays in society in terms of helping in some way? Sorry, I'm not asking that in a negative way. I'm just really interested, do you have a perspective of anything like that, how it helps people to read about this sort of things?
I'm going to ask Anna and Sulari to answer that. Anna first.
Yeah, 100%. So the question is basically, does crime fiction have a role in kind of healing, basically? Is that what you're saying? Is it helpful? And 100%, yeah. I think that, particularly at the moment, during the pandemic, crime fiction and thrillers went nuts. Everybody was reading them. And I think that it was, you might have thought that in such a dark time, people were looking for uplifting novels and feel-goods and romances, and they weren't. They were looking for things, looking for escapism, but which doesn't deny you your feelings of anxiety, right? So that's one thing that crime fiction does, is that it speaks to any kind of fear or anxiety or worries that you have, and it helps you kind of work through them. And also, hopefully, it will also offer you some light and hope at the end. So I've spoken to a lot of thriller writers over the last 12 to 18 months or so, and most of them say that's the way that you deal with writing dark material, is that you offer this light and hope at the end of it. And I think that also, particularly at the moment, more so now than ever, we're confused, we're bewildered, we don't know what information to trust. Everything feels like a bit of a puzzle. And crime fiction is wonderful in that you can sit down and you can slowly watch the pieces fall into place, which is very satisfying. I know I really like that. I like to be, open a book and be like, I trust this person to take me on a journey, and I trust that they're going to put the pieces together for me at the end. And I trust that also, a really good crime thriller writer will not just feed you those pieces, but they will let you put them together yourself, so you feel very clever at the end of it as well. That's what I think it does.
Sulari.
Look, I've always been very aware that people do actually get murdered, and there are people out there who are dealing with that. And what you are doing is you're writing about the worst thing that can happen to people. And so I'm a little bit careful about whether you just want to chuck that as entertainment. I think one of the reasons, as Anna was saying, that crime fiction has really gained in popularity when the world seems to be going to hell lately, is because crime fiction is essentially not necessarily about murder or about the crime, but about the person who stands up and says no, about the person who goes to who seeks justice on behalf of someone else or for themselves, the person who seeks the truth and who seeks to put things right again. And that, I think, is a very comforting thing when everything seems to be falling apart. So I think I've always, I like to call crime fiction the literature of resistance, because at its heart, it's about people standing up and saying, no, not going to accept that. I'm going to fight against that. So that's... What was the original question? Sorry.
Why is crime fiction important?
Yeah,
why is it
So
helpful?
I think that is why it's helpful. That is why it's important. The other thing is that crime fiction is also a great vehicle to talk about something else. So we were just talking about this for the past couple of days, actually. Crime authors are often talking to you about some other issue, whether it's social justice or racial equity or gender equity, or some social issue of import. And they do it through the vehicle of a crime fiction, because writing polemics has never actually helped persuade people. But if you can talk to them, if you can get them to put their guards and their positions down for long enough that they will actually listen, you may be able to persuade them. And crime fiction is excellent as a vehicle for doing that.
What do you think, Candice? Got a minute.
Yes. No, I agree with everything that's been said. Yes, you've got to be very careful about presenting crime as entertainment. Having said that, I find crime incredibly entertaining. Sorry, I thought you were just... I thought you said, I'm going to have these two answer that. And then for a moment, I just took a quantum of solace here. No, and I didn't think about my answer. I'm sorry. No, yes.
Thank you for your answer, Candice. And on that very erudite and intellectually stimulating note, I'd like to thank our 3 stars, Anna Downs, Sulari, Gentill and Candice. Thank you.